Do you think being abandoned by your family is the worst fate in the world? It is not. The true nightmare is being bled dry by your own flesh and blood, trapped in a perfectly designed prison of poverty while they live in absolute luxury on the wealth that is rightfully yours. Listen closely to how I took everything back and turned the dinner celebrating their lies into a total death sentence for the entire family. Hello? And a very warm welcome to the wonderful listeners of the Daisy Revenge Stories channel. Unfortunately, YouTube has recently disabled our monetization features, leaving us without the budget to operate and pay our dedicated team to cover their living expenses. If you find today's story engaging, please consider supporting us with just $1 by scanning the PayPal QR code on your screen or clicking the PayPal link in the description or the comments section, so we can keep creating these stories to serve you. I am Mina Hayes, and for the longest time, I believed my suffering was a necessary virtue. For the past 5 years, my entire existence was defined by harsh fluorescent lights, stale break room coffee, and a bone-deep exhaustion that never seemed to wash away. No matter how many hours I slept, I was a nameless, faceless drone working at Aetheris Vertex Group, a massive, unforgiving tech conglomerate that chewed up junior employees and spat them out without a second thought. I worked myself to the absolute brink of physical and mental collapse, taking on the grueling shifts nobody else wanted, just to maintain my position while I ruthlessly battled my way through a master's degree in systems architecture. Every single line of complex code I wrote, every agonizing, sleepless night I endured staring at glowing monitors, was supposedly for the greater good of my family. My reality was exceptionally bleak. I lived in a tiny, dilapidated studio apartment on the worst side of the city. The heating unit barely functioned during the bitter winter months, forcing me to sleep in my winter coat, and the cracked ceiling wept dirty water onto my floor whenever it rained. I skipped meals constantly. I survived on discount instant noodles, cheap bread, and tap water, meticulously counting every single penny. Why did I live like a beggar while working a demanding corporate tech job? Because on the first day of every single month, I transferred exactly 60% of my hard-earned salary directly into the bank account of my parents, Arthur and Evelyn. They called it the sacred family business debt. Ever since I was a teenager, my parents had systematically drilled it into my skull that they had mortgaged their own future, taken out ruinous, high-interest loans, and sacrificed their own comfort and security purely to feed me and put me through school. The guilt they weaponized was a heavy, suffocating iron chain around my neck, and like a foolish, dutiful daughter, I wore it willingly. I truly believed it was my absolute moral duty to pay them back, to bleed myself dry to save them from the terrifying financial ruin they constantly and tearfully lamented over the phone. Meanwhile, my older brother, Liam, lived in an entirely different universe. Liam was the undisputed golden child, a handsome, charismatic man who had never worked a genuinely hard day in his entire life, but constantly paraded around town as a highly successful visionary entrepreneur. While I was sitting in the dark rationing my electricity to save a few cents, Liam was casually posting vibrant photographs from his extravagant, month-long vacations in the Maldives or his luxury ski trips in the Swiss Alps. He was always launching some vague, flashy new startup company, projects that were supposedly funded entirely by my parents' hard-earned retirement savings. Arthur and Evelyn always defended his lavish lifestyle, passionately claiming he just needed a little financial push to become the next billionaire, while simultaneously calling me in tears, demanding I work overtime to cover their overdue utility bills. All of this quiet, simmering injustice, all of the lies, and the desperate hunger, culminated on the evening of my graduation, to celebrate my newly minted master's degree. My parents insisted on hosting a grandiose dinner party at Le Rêve Doré, arguably the most exclusive and expensive French restaurant in the entire city. The sickening hypocrisy of the venue was not lost on me. I was sitting there wearing a cheap, frayed second-hand dress I had bought from a thrift store, situated directly under glittering crystal chandeliers. surrounded by heavy velvet drapes and waiters gliding around in crisp tuxedos. The long mahogany table was adorned with polished silver cutlery and massive centerpieces of imported exotic flowers that undoubtedly cost more than my entire grocery budget for 6 months. Arthur stood up at the head of the table, confidently clinking his silver spoon against his crystal champagne flute to command the room's attention. He puffed out his chest, wearing a bespoke tailored suit that looked entirely too new and horribly expensive, and offered a magnificent toast. He spoke passionately and eloquently about my resilience, my endless sacrifice, and my incredible independence. He painted a masterful, tear-jerking picture of a devoted, loving family that had stood by my side, supporting me through thick and thin. The other guests, mostly my parents' wealthy, pretentious country club acquaintances, clapped politely, practically dabbing their eyes at my father's supposed unwavering paternal devotion. I forced a tight, polite smile, my stomach churning violently from the rich, buttery food I was too anxious and exhausted to even properly digest. And then, the atmosphere shifted in an instant. My grandmother, Beatrice, who had flown in all the way from the West Coast specifically for this milestone occasion, leaned forward in her chair. She was a sharp, incredibly elegant woman who rarely missed a single detail in any room she entered. She reached out across the pristine white tablecloth, patted my trembling hand gently with her warm, wrinkled fingers, and smiled at me with absolute, genuine adoration. "My beautiful girl," she said, her voice clear, confident, and easily carrying over the soft, ambient jazz music playing in the background. "I am so incredibly proud of you, and I am so very glad that the trust fund of $5,000 a month I have been sending you for the past 5 years has helped you not have to worry about money during your arduous studies." The entire dining room shattered into an absolute, deafening silence. The polite clinking of expensive silverware immediately stopped. The ambient chatter died. Arthur's grandiose, proud smile froze onto his face, stiffening into a terrifying, unnatural wax mask. The delicate crystal wine glass currently gripped in Evelyn's manicured hand began to tremble violently, spilling dark red wine that bled onto the immaculate white tablecloth like an open wound. In that microscopic fraction of a second, as the cheerful jazz music suddenly felt like a morbid funeral march, a bottomless, terrifying abyss opened up right beneath my feet. The truth hit me with the force of a speeding train. I was not a dutiful, loving daughter sacrificing to save my struggling family. I was a prisoner. They were my greedy, parasitic wardens, and my entire life was a perfectly constructed lie. The silence hung heavy and absolute, pressing against my eardrums like a physical weight. I felt the acid rising in my throat, a violent tidal wave of betrayal threatening to rip a feral scream right out of my lungs. But I looked at my father's panicked, bloodless face and my mother's violently shaking hand. In that suspended fraction of a second, raw survival instincts I did not even know I possessed took complete control. I swallowed the burning bile and the screaming agony. I tilted my head, blinked with wide, innocent eyes, and forced a soft, airy, completely confused giggle to bubble from my lips. "Oh, Grandma," I said, my voice dripping with naive sweetness and gentle amusement. "You are always mixing up your stories. You must mean the $50 you send me for my birthday every single year, right? I think the terrible jet lag is making you imagine I am some sort of secret corporate heiress." Arthur exhaled so sharply it sounded like a punctured tire rapidly losing air. He practically lunged across the wide mahogany table to desperately grab hold of the narrative I had just handed him. Yes, of course, that must be it," he stammered, his booming, confident voice returning with a frantic, desperate edge. "Mother, you must be absolutely exhausted. The 3-hour time difference from the coast is always so brutal on the memory at your age. Let us get you some sparkling water." Evelyn immediately chimed in, her voice trembling an entire octave too high, signaling for the nearest waiter with aggressive, frantic snaps of her manicured fingers. "Check, please. We need the check immediately. We need to get Beatrice back to her hotel suite so she can rest. The poor thing. Her mind is just completely exhausted from the long flight. They wrapped up the extravagant dinner with terrifying, clumsy speed. They threw several $100 bills onto the table and ushered us out of the fancy French restaurant like fleeing criminals escaping a heist. I played my part perfectly, kissing my grandmother goodnight and waving to my parents like the clueless, obedient daughter they relied on. I declined their offer for a ride home. Citing a fake early morning project meeting, I walked down the damp, urine-scented stairs into the belly of the subway station, swiping my worn yellow Metro card. It was well past midnight. The harsh fluorescent lights of the train car flickered rhythmically, casting sickly, pale shadows over the empty plastic seats. I sat rigidly in the corner, staring blankly at my exhausted reflection in the dark. Grimy window. My mind, which had been rigorously trained to build and analyze complex architectural systems, automatically began to process the raw data. Piece by agonizing piece, the puzzle snapped together with horrifying, crystal clarity. $5,000 every single month, $60,000 a year, $300,000 over the span of 5 years. And that was just the grandmotherly trust fund. Add in the exact 60% of my demanding corporate salary that I had been faithfully transferring to them every 4 weeks, and the stolen sum became absolutely astronomical. My brain violently superimposed conflicting images. I vividly remembered the excruciating, blinding stomach pains I ignored last November because I absolutely could not afford a $200 trip to the emergency room. That memory played right alongside the crystal-clear image of my mother casually showcasing her brand-new, custom-cut diamond tennis bracelet at our family Thanksgiving dinner. I remembered shivering violently in my unheated studio apartment, calculating if I could afford to buy fresh spinach and decent eggs, while my older brother Liam posted a glossy, high-definition video revving the engine of his brand-new, imported Italian sports car. They had never been struggling. There was no catastrophic, looming family business debt threatening to destroy them. My supposed fierce independence was never a noble, character-building lesson. It was a perfectly engineered, psychological cage. They had weaponized my deep love and my blind sense of duty, forcing me to grind my bones into dust just to sustain their sickening opulence. They were systematically stealing the massive wealth my grandmother intended for my security, and then mercilessly extorting my meager wages on top of it all. They were double-dipping into my lifeblood while watching me slowly starve. Normally, a revelation of this devastating magnitude would completely break a normal person. They would weep uncontrollably. They would confront their abusers in a fit of passionate rage. They would scream and demand immediate answers. But as the metal train violently rattled through the dark, damp tunnels, I realized that shedding even a single tear for Arthur and Evelyn would be a pathetic waste of hydration. The blistering, roaring fire of ultimate betrayal inside my chest did not erupt into a weeping, hysterical meltdown. Instead, the intense heat rapidly condensed. It froze completely over, crystallizing into sharp, indestructible, 0-degree ice. If I confronted them right now, they would simply deny everything. They would manipulate the entire narrative, quickly hide the stolen assets in offshore accounts, and emotionally gaslight me into thinking I was losing my mind. No, simply demanding my stolen money back was nowhere near enough punishment. You do not just ask a blood-sucking parasite to leave your body politely, you mercilessly exterminate it. I decided right then and there, staring into the pitch-black abyss rushing past the train window, that I would meticulously dismantle their entire fraudulent existence. I would tear down the glorious empire of lies they had built on my broken back, brick by bloody brick, until there was absolutely nothing left but worthless dust. I walked the last 6 blocks to my dilapidated apartment building in the freezing, pouring rain. When I finally unlocked my flimsy door, I did not collapse onto my cheap, sagging mattress. I sat straight up at my battered, second-hand desk, opened my glowing laptop, and began drafting an entirely new system architecture. Only this time, I was not building a corporate software network. I was designing an inescapable, lethal trap. When my cracked phone rang sharply at exactly 8 o'clock the very next morning, bearing my mother's familiar caller identification, I picked it up on the second ring. "Good morning." "Mom," I said, my voice sounding as bright, cheerful, and dutifully compliant as ever. "Yes, I am already sitting at my desk at the office. Of course, I can easily pick up that extra weekend shift to help out with Dad's unexpected credit card bill. Do not worry about me at all. I love you both so much." The trap was set, and the hunt had officially begun. 2 days after the disastrous dinner, I took a sudden sick day from my corporate job and drove a cheap rental car to the luxury hotel where my grandmother was currently staying. I went there fully prepared to execute a subtle, delicate psychological manipulation to acquire the necessary financial documents without alarming her. I severely underestimated Beatrice. When I cautiously walked into her opulent penthouse suite, she was already sitting on the plush velvet sofa, sipping a cup of hot black tea, with a towering stack of thick manila folders resting heavily on the glass coffee table in front of her. "You did not fool me for a single second at that restaurant, Mina," she said smoothly, her sharp eyes locking onto mine with the intensity of a hunting hawk. "I saw the absolute naked terror in Arthur's eyes the moment I mentioned your money. I have spent the last 48 hours making a series of very discreet, highly aggressive phone calls to my wealth managers." She slid the heavy folders across the polished glass surface. They were certified, original, watermarked bank statements from her personal financial institution. We spent over 3 agonizing hours meticulously tracking the complex routing numbers together. The $5,000 she faithfully wired every single month did not magically bounce into the ether. It landed squarely and consistently in a clandestine, high-yield joint account registered exclusively under Arthur and Evelyn Hayes. He had successfully forged my signature on a complex custodial release form exactly 5 years ago, legally intercepting the massive funds before I even possessed the maturity to know they existed. I needed the exact digital paper trail from his end to build an absolutely airtight criminal case. Fate, dripping with sick, cruel irony, handed me the perfect opportunity on a silver platter. The very next week, Arthur and Evelyn happily jetted off on a lavish, 14-day luxury river cruise winding through the heart of Europe. It was a highly expensive vacation funded entirely by the massive corporate bonus check I had dutifully handed over to them just last month to supposedly save our family home from a non-existent foreclosure. The exact moment their international flight departed the runway, I let myself into their sprawling, 5-bedroom suburban estate using the emergency spare key safely hidden under the heavy stone gargoyle by the front porch. The sheer, breathtaking opulence of their home made me physically nauseous. I walked past imported Italian marble countertops and custom leather furniture, marching straight into my father's imposing mahogany-paneled home office. I locked the heavy oak door firmly behind me and immediately booted up his sleek, top-of-the-line desktop computer. My father was a man of immense arrogance but terrible digital security. It took me exactly 9 minutes to bypass his main operating system login screen. His password was simply his own birth year followed immediately by the word millionaire. I plunged recklessly into the dark labyrinth of his primary hard drive. As a senior systems architect, digging through complex, hidden directories was my absolute specialty. I ignored the mundane family photograph files and relentlessly hunted for encrypted, password-protected partitions. I ran a customized data scraping script I had coded myself, forcing the machine to cough up its deepest, darkest secrets. I finally cracked a highly suspicious, unlabeled subfolder buried deep inside a decade-old tax document directory. What I found inside made the blood freeze entirely in my veins, dropping my core temperature to absolute 0. It was a scanned, notarized copy of a commercial limited liability company registration. The official business name listed was Apex Prime Properties. My vision violently blurred, my lungs completely seized, refusing to draw in oxygen. Apex Prime Properties was the faceless, ruthless property management firm that legally owned my dilapidated, mold-infested apartment building. For 5 agonizing years, I had been sending my exorbitant, painfully earned rent checks to a sterile corporate post office box. Whenever the fragile heating unit completely broke during the brutal winter storms, whenever the cracked ceiling leaked dirty, freezing water onto my mattress, the aggressive building manager would promptly threaten me with immediate, merciless eviction if I dared to withhold my rent for repairs. I stared unblinkingly at the bold ownership signatures firmly stamped on the digital legal document. Arthur and Evelyn Hayes, my own parents, were my brutal, unforgiving landlords. They purposefully placed me in a hazardous, unlivable, dangerous slum. They purposely charged me 30% above the standard city market rate. They callously collected my hard-earned money on the first day of every single month. I vividly recalled the countless times I sat on their luxurious living room couch, sobbing uncontrollably about my cruel slumlord refusing to fix my broken locks, while they gently stroked my hair, offering me hollow sympathy, knowing full well they were the ones actively cashing my rent checks to buy imported vintage wines. The absolute, unadulterated, psychopathic evil of it was completely breathtaking, but the terrifying horrors did not stop there. The pitch-black rabbit hole of their depravity went even deeper. In a hidden deleted items folder that my father had stupidly failed to properly wipe from the server, I uncovered a long, chaotic chain of frantic, panicked emails. They were not from a bank or a corporate partner. They were from my brother, Liam. The digital timestamps dated back exactly 3 years. Liam had accidentally stumbled upon the trust fund bank statements while casually borrowing my father's laptop for a gaming session. Instead of running to tell his beloved little sister, the supposed golden child saw a massive, lucrative business opportunity. I read through the digital extortion letters with utter, suffocating disgust. Liam aggressively threatened to expose the entire massive embezzlement scheme directly to me and to the federal authorities unless Arthur and Evelyn agreed to permanently fund his lavish, irresponsible lifestyle under the convenient guise of fake startup investments, the imported Italian sports car, the month-long ski trips in the Alps, the expensive designer clothing lines. All of it was literal hush money. Liam was not a brilliant tech entrepreneur. He was a parasitic, cold-blooded blackmailer, happily and maliciously bleeding my parents dry while they collectively bled me into an early grave. My hands operated with the cold, precise, mechanical efficiency of a surgical robot. I pulled a military-grade, encrypted external hard drive from my jacket pocket and connected it directly to the computer tower. I transferred every single piece of damning, radioactive evidence, the forged trust fund custodial agreements, the international wire transfer receipts, the corporate registration documents for the Slumlord Shell Company, the 3 agonizing years' worth of undeniable, legally binding extortion emails from Liam. I meticulously copied absolutely everything, intentionally leaving the original digital files exactly as I found them, flawlessly maintaining the pristine, comforting illusion of their safety. I wiped my digital footprints cleanly from the machine, powered it down to a silent hum, and walked out of the massive house without disturbing a single grain of microscopic dust. My next destination was not my miserable, freezing apartment. It was a sleek, towering high-rise corporate building located directly in the center of the wealthy downtown financial district. Before leaving her hotel suite, Beatrice had silently slipped me a small, heavy business card bearing an intimidating golden crest. It belonged to a prestigious, absolutely ruthless white-collar financial crimes lawyer and a highly decorated veteran forensic accountant. They were elite, legal predators retained exclusively by my grandmother's incredibly wealthy estate. I confidently walked into their immaculate, glass-walled conference room, dropped the heavy encrypted hard drive directly onto the center of the massive granite table, and sat down in the leather chair. I looked the formidable, sharp-suited lawyer directly in the eye and laid out the exact, uncompromising parameters of my impending strike. We were not just going to quietly sue my family in a civil court to simply get my money back. We were going to meticulously construct a devastating, coordinated federal indictment for wire fraud, identity theft, tax evasion, and criminal extortion that would legally strip them of every single asset they owned and lock them in a concrete cell. I waited exactly 3 days after they returned from their luxurious European river cruise before making my first move. I needed them completely relaxed, still glowing with the blinding arrogance of untouchable, stolen wealth. Sitting at my cheap secondhand desk, I dialed my mother's private number and pressed the bright red record button on a hidden audio device I had purchased specifically for this occasion. When Evelyn finally answered, her voice dripping with post-vacation lethargy and slight irritation, I immediately launched into a desperately practiced, tearful performance. "Mom, please, I am so sorry to bother you," I sobbed, forcing a painful, ragged tremor into my voice. "The clinic doctors say I have severe bleeding stomach ulcers from the intense stress and the malnutrition. I urgently need a prescription for emergency medication, but it costs $400 out of pocket, and my account is completely empty. Can you please, just this once, lend me the money? I promise I will work triple overnight shifts next month to pay you back every single cent." The silence on the other end of the line was absolute, a freezing, cold void. Then, Evelyn sighed heavily, a distinct sound of profound, exhausted annoyance rather than maternal concern. "Mina, darling, you know exactly how incredibly tight our finances are right now with the crushing family business debt. Giving you a financial handout would completely ruin the beautiful sense of independence we have spent years instilling in you. You are a strong, highly educated woman now. You need to pull yourself up by your own bootstraps, endure the pain, drink some cheap herbal tea, and figure it out. We simply cannot enable your irresponsibility." I smiled a terrifying, bone-chilling smile at my peeling office wall as I firmly clicked stop, saving the pristine, damning audio file. "You are right, Mom. I understand perfectly. Thank you for the guidance." The very next evening, I visited their sprawling suburban estate, playing the role of the perfectly obedient and properly chastised daughter. I sat in their grand vaulted living room and began the psychological manipulation, stroking their massive egos with surgical precision. "Mom, Dad, I have been thinking a lot about what you said yesterday," I murmured, staring at the imported Persian rug in feigned reverence. "You have sacrificed absolutely everything to build my character, with my master's degree finally complete. I feel terrible that all the academic credit goes to me. You both deserve to be publicly and widely celebrated for your incredible parenting and your flawless financial guidance. You should host a grand honorary gala. Invite all your elite country club friends, your major corporate business partners, and local politicians. Let the entire high society see the magnificent, resilient family empire you have built from scratch." Arthur and Evelyn practically salivated at the prospect of supreme social validation, the idea of parading me around as their ultimate living trophy, a breathing testament to their supposed noble sacrifices, was an intoxicating drug they simply could not resist. Within exactly 48 hours, they had booked the grand ballroom at the Diamond Crest Hotel, the most notoriously expensive five-star venue in the entire state. Eager to showcase their manufactured perfection to the wealthy elite of the city, while my parents busied themselves aggressively arguing over imported caviar selections and premium champagne vintages for their vanity project, the true foundation of their empire was being silently annihilated behind heavily closed mahogany doors on the West Coast. My grandmother Beatrice was executing her own lethal maneuvers. She invited her most trusted, cutthroat estate attorneys into her luxury penthouse. With a remarkably steady hand and a heart completely hardened against her greedy, deceitful son, she permanently severed Arthur from the massive family fortune. She signed an ironclad, irrevocable legal trust document, completely disinheriting him and transferring full, absolute legal power of attorney and the entirety of the generational wealth directly to me. Arthur was now officially a dead man walking, utterly oblivious to the fact that the golden goose he thought he had safely chained up was now actively gripping the butcher's knife. Simultaneously, my newly acquired elite legal team was moving with terrifying, predatory speed. We did not merely submit a polite complaint to a local police precinct. My senior lawyers marched directly into the regional headquarters of the Federal Bureau of Investigation, carrying the encrypted hard drive heavily loaded with undeniable proof of systemic financial fraud, identity theft, and malicious extortion. The senior federal prosecutors took one single look at the fraudulent slumlord registration documents and Liam's digital blackmail trail, and they immediately began aggressively drafting the indictments. I sat in a sterile, windowless interrogation room with a lead federal agent, meticulously coordinating the precise timing of the impending raid. I requested one specific, non-negotiable favor. I needed the heavily armed agents to violently breach the grand ballroom doors at exactly 9 o'clock on the night of the gala. With the legal noose perfectly tightened, I focused my attention entirely on the theatrical elements of their impending execution. I volunteered to personally design the emotional centerpiece of the evening. It was meant to be a 10-minute-long tribute video intended to play on a massive, state-of-the-art cinematic screen directly behind the main speaker's podium. I spent several sleepless days carefully splicing together beautiful, heartwarming childhood photographs, overlaying them with soft, sentimental acoustic music to create the perfect illusion. Next, I visited an incredibly exclusive custom stationery shop downtown. I ordered exactly 100 thick, luxurious matte black envelopes, each one meticulously sealed with an elegant, blood-red wax stamp bearing our fake family crest. Inside every single envelope, I carefully folded crisp, high-resolution color copies of the most radioactive evidence, the bank statements showing my stolen trust fund, the corporate registry proving Arthur and Evelyn were my ruthless slumlord property managers, the disgusting, greedy blackmail emails from Liam demanding a brand-new imported sports car to keep his mouth shut. On the chaotic afternoon of the highly anticipated event, I bribed the hotel's senior banquet manager with $2,000 in crisp cash. I personally walked through the empty, glittering ballroom, carefully securing one thick black envelope tightly underneath the velvet cushion of every single assigned seat at the VIP dining tables. The trap was flawlessly set, beautifully disguised beneath a thick veneer of absolute luxury. My parents were eagerly preparing to step into the blinding spotlight, completely unaware that the grand stage they had rented was actually their own meticulously designed scaffold. The grand ballroom of the Diamond Crest Hotel was a magnificent, suffocating monument to their vanity. Crystal chandeliers the size of small cars cast a golden, buttery glow over tables draped in heavy imported silk. It was a flawless, 5-star illusion. The guest list was a meticulously curated collection of the most powerful people in the city. Dozens of Arthur's major corporate business partners, heavily perfumed, high-society socialites from Evelyn's elite country club, and even a few local politicians were present, sipping vintage champagne that cost thousands of dollars per bottle. They were a captive audience of the wealthy and influential, gathered to worship at the altar of the Hayes family perfection. Exactly halfway through the decadent 5-course meal, Arthur confidently strode up to the beautifully illuminated podium at the front of the room. The ambient chatter instantly died down as he adjusted the microphone. He looked incredibly distinguished in his bespoke tuxedo, playing the role of the humble, devoted patriarch to absolute perfection. "Ladies and gentlemen, esteemed colleagues, and dear friends," Arthur began, his booming voice echoing through the massive sound system. He paused, brilliantly conjuring a single, glistening crocodile tear to roll down his perfectly shaved cheek. Being a parent is the most agonizing, beautiful sacrifice a human being can make. When we looked at our darling daughter, we knew that true love was not about handing her a silver spoon. True love is about building resilience. It is about letting them struggle, letting them face the harsh, unforgiving realities of the world, so they can emerge as forged steel. He placed a hand elegantly over his heart, gazing out at the captivated crowd. We made the heartbreaking choice to let her fight her own battles. We endured the pain of watching her struggle through her rigorous academic degree, working long, grueling hours, because we knew it was the only way to build her character. And today, looking at the brilliant, fiercely independent woman she has become, I can proudly say that every single sacrifice we made was entirely worth it. The ballroom absolutely erupted into thunderous, standing applause. Wealthy women actively dabbed their eyes with silk handkerchiefs. Business executives nodded in solemn, profound respect. It was a masterclass in psychological manipulation, a sickening display of pure, unadulterated narcissistic delusion. I stood up from my seat at the head table, wearing a completely serene, angelic smile. I walked up the plush carpeted steps onto the grand stage as the applause swelled even louder. I approached my father, throwing my arms around his neck in a desperate, picture-perfect embrace. I pulled Evelyn in, hugging her tightly. It was the ultimate, flawless Judas kiss. "Thank you, Dad," I whispered into the microphone, my voice echoing clearly across the massive room. "Your guidance means absolutely everything to me. In fact, I have prepared a special, profound tribute to showcase exactly what kind of parents you truly are." I looked to the back of the room and gave a sharp, definitive nod to the hired audiovisual technicians sitting in the elevated control booth. The brilliant stage lights instantly dimmed. The massive, high-definition cinematic screen spanning the entire wall directly behind us flared to life. Soft, emotionally manipulative acoustic guitar music began to play. For exactly 10 seconds, the audience was treated to beautiful, sun-drenched childhood photographs, me riding a tricycle, Liam blowing out birthday candles, Arthur and Evelyn smiling radiantly on a sandy beach. A collective, warm sigh swept through the dark ballroom. Then, the soft acoustic music died with a jarring, violent digital screech. The enormous screen went completely pitch black for one terrifying second. When it violently flashed back on, the heartwarming family photographs were entirely gone. Replacing them was a massive, high-resolution scan of a certified banking statement. The audience squinted, utterly confused by the sudden aesthetic shift. Then, thick, bleeding red circles began animating across the screen, aggressively highlighting the specific transaction details. The text was magnified to a massive size, impossible to ignore. $5,000. Transferred monthly from the Beatrice Hayes Trust directly into the joint checking account of Arthur and Evelyn Hayes. A bright red text overlay violently stamped itself across the screen. Stolen trust fund dollars. Over $300,000 embezzled. A sharp collective gasp echoed through the room. Arthur completely froze at the podium, his hand rigidly gripping the microphone stand. The color instantly drained from his face, leaving him looking like a terrified, well-dressed corpse. Before anyone could even process the massive financial theft, the slide aggressively transitioned with a loud, metallic booming sound effect. The new image was an official, government-stamped commercial business license. "I know it is a bit hard to read from the back tables," I said into the microphone, my voice completely devoid of any emotion, cold and sharp as a surgeon's scalpel. "So I made sure you all have a physical copy. Please, reach directly underneath your velvet chair cushions. You will find a black envelope waiting for you." The wealthy, elite guests, driven by morbid, uncontrollable human curiosity, began frantically reaching under their seats. The sound of 100 thick paper envelopes tearing open simultaneously filled the grand ballroom like a swarm of hungry locusts. The massive screen highlighted the business name on the license, Apex Prime Properties. Next to it, an aggressive, threatening eviction notice signed by the property manager was displayed side by side with the official ownership signatures, Arthur and Evelyn Hayes. "As you can perfectly see," I announced calmly, watching the absolute horror dawn on the faces of their wealthy friends, "my parents did not just let me struggle to build character. They actively owned the crumbling, freezing slum apartment where I lived in absolute misery. They intentionally charged me extortionate rent, threatening to throw me out onto the cold winter streets if my corporate paycheck was even one single day late. They happily watched me starve. They watched me suffer from severe malnutrition, while they used my stolen rent money and my grandmother's hijacked trust fund to finance the expensive vintage champagne you are all drinking tonight." The entire ballroom violently descended into sheer, unadulterated chaos. The polite, high society decorum completely shattered in an instant. Disgusted whispers erupted into loud, horrified exclamations. A prominent local politician sitting at table 4 threw his heavy linen napkin down in absolute revulsion and immediately stood up to rush toward the exit. Evelyn was physically trembling. Her hands clamped desperately over her mouth as she stared at the damning legal paperwork being passed frantically around the room. The velvet curtain had not just fallen, it had violently caught fire, burning their immaculate, fake empire entirely to the ground in front of absolutely everyone they desperately wanted to impress. Arthur let out a guttural sound, something halfway between a furious roar and a terrified sob. He abandoned the wooden podium, his expensive leather shoes slipping awkwardly on the polished stage floor as he launched himself violently toward the elevated control booth. He was frantically waving his arms, desperately screaming at the paralyzed audiovisual technician to cut the main power, to pull the physical plug, to do absolutely anything to stop the digital bleeding. But I had prepared for his pathetic panic. I calmly reached into the pocket of my dress and pressed the master override button on a small, wireless remote I had specifically synced to the presentation laptop. The massive screen behind me flickered one final time. It completely bypassed the rest of the financial documents and landed directly on the grand finale. The slide was a highly magnified, aggressively bright screenshot of a heavily encrypted digital email chain. At the very top, the sender's name was displayed in massive, undeniable letters, Liam Hayes. And let us absolutely not forget the beloved visionary entrepreneur of the family, I announced, my voice cutting through the chaotic, buzzing room like a razor blade. While you were all being actively solicited to invest in his supposed genius startup companies, Liam was busy running a highly lucrative extortion ring. The crowd stared in absolute shock as the undeniable text of the emails burned into their retinas. They read Liam aggressively demanding hundreds of thousands of dollars, completely threatening to expose his parents' massive trust fund theft to me unless they immediately bought him a brand new, imported sports car and funded his month-long luxury ski trips. The glittering facade of the golden child instantly evaporated, revealing a parasitic, opportunistic blackmailer who was happily drinking my blood right alongside them. At the far end of the ballroom, near the heavily draped emergency exits, I saw a sudden, frantic movement. Liam, who had been loudly boasting about his fake venture capital firm just 20 minutes prior, was now desperately trying to slip out the back doors like a cowardly rat fleeing a sinking ship. He forcefully pushed a waiter aside, his hands frantically grabbing the heavy brass handles of the double doors, but he never even made it into the hallway. Exactly as the heavy brass doors swung violently open, they were aggressively blocked by a towering wall of dark tactical gear. The federal agents had arrived with perfect, terrifying punctuality. 6 heavily armed agents, wearing bold yellow lettering across their dark jackets, stormed into the elegant ballroom. The lead agent did not hesitate for a single second. He firmly grabbed Liam by the collar of his expensive tailored suit, aggressively spinning him around and slamming him against the ornate floral wallpaper. The cold, metallic click of heavy steel handcuffs ratcheting shut around Liam's wrists echoed sharply across the suddenly dead silent room. Right on cue, my grandmother's elite financial crimes lawyer strode confidently up the center aisle of the ballroom, holding a thick stack of aggressively stamped legal documents. He did not bother with pleasantries. He walked directly up to the stage, completely ignoring the terrified, hyperventilating Arthur. Arthur and Evelyn Hayes, the lawyer announced, his booming, authoritative voice easily reaching every single corner of the massive room without needing a microphone. I am officially serving you with an emergency federal injunction as of exactly 8 o'clock this evening. Every single bank account, investment portfolio, and offshore holding associated with your names has been entirely and completely frozen. You are both currently under active federal investigation for multiple counts of aggravated identity theft, severe wire fraud, and massive corporate money laundering. Evelyn's legs completely gave out beneath her. She collapsed violently onto the hard stage floor, her expensive silk gown pooling around her like a deflated parachute. The arrogant, composed high society matriarch was entirely gone. She began to weep hysterically, crawling desperately across the floor toward me, her hands reaching out to grab the hem of my dress. "Mina, please, you have to understand," Evelyn wailed, tears and thick mascara streaming down her panicked face in ugly, dark streaks. "We were just trying to protect you. We were holding the money for your own good. We were so terrified you would waste it all on foolish things. Please, my darling girl, you have to tell them to stop. We are your family. We can fix this together." I looked down at the pathetic, broken woman sobbing at my feet. I did not feel a single drop of pity, nor a shred of anger. I felt absolutely nothing but the pure, exhilarating rush of complete vindication. I slowly reached into my small clutch purse and pulled out the single, rusted brass key to my dilapidated, freezing, mold-infested apartment. I tossed the metal key. It landed with a sharp, heavy clink directly on the wooden floorboard, inches from her trembling, manicured fingers. I leaned down, bringing my face just inches from hers, and whispered so softly that only she and Arthur could hear my final, lethal verdict. "There is absolutely no need to apologize, Mom, and you do not need to worry about my financial responsibility ever again. I used the immense, generational wealth that Grandmother Beatrice legally transferred to my exclusive control this morning to completely buy out the mortgage on our beautiful family estate. The deed is officially in my name. You have exactly 24 hours to pack your bags and get the hell out of my house." I straightened my posture, smoothing the fabric of my dress. I did not look back at Arthur, who was now being firmly escorted off the stage by a federal agent, or at Evelyn, who was screaming hysterically on the floor. I turned my back on the burning wreckage of their pathetic, fraudulent lives and walked slowly and deliberately down the center aisle. The incredibly wealthy, elite guests actively parted like the Red Sea, completely silent, staring at me with a mixture of absolute terror and profound awe. I walked out of the grand, suffocating ballroom, pushing through the heavy glass doors of the luxury hotel, and stepped out into the crisp, cool night air. The heavy, suffocating iron chain that had bound me for my entire life was finally broken. I took a deep, unrestricted breath, stepping forward into a brilliant, fiercely independent, and absolutely free life. Thank you so incredibly much for listening to today's story. I would love to know where you are tuning in from, so please let me know in the comments below. As I mentioned at the beginning, our channel is currently facing severe financial difficulties without YouTube monetization. If you felt moved by this story and enjoyed the journey, please consider supporting our hardworking team with a donation of just $1. You can easily do so by scanning the PayPal QR code currently displayed on your screen, or by using the PayPal link provided in the video description and the pinned comment. Your generous support allows us to feed our families and continue creating these thrilling, high-quality stories for you to enjoy. Thank you again, and stay strong.